I've been really lucky in the last couple of years with the outcomes of the projects I've been working on, the funding that I've had, and getting this award has made a huge difference as well. The Cardiovascular Research Network, I've been a part of it for a number of years. It really forms a focus for all career stages of cardiovascular researchers in this state and in other states as well. And it's so important to have this, to be able to build networks for each individual. It's especially important for early career investigators because they get a chance to talk and interact with more senior investigators as well as their peers. And it's just a very good community spirit. Then start moving out from it and get their own funding. And so it's a really important recognition, I guess, that there is a cycle that we all live on where we need to be able to invest in the next generation. And I guess the other thing I need to say just in closing is that there are a lot of people in this room that are part of the reason why I'm standing here tonight. And I would like to thank every one of them. I think most of them know who they are. There's a couple in particular. Philip Butt has been there since day one, and that's a lot of days ago. There's also a couple of others, Len Chrythrides and Blake Cochran as well. And I'd like to thank you very much. Once again, thank you to the CVRN for this incredible award.
Well, thank you very much. Congratulations to the recipients of the awards, and thanks again to the Honourable Brad Hazzard for presenting the awards for the network tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as you know, the theme of this showcase tonight is Resilience, Recharge, Recovery, CVD in rural and remote New South Wales. It's all about the importance of addressing inequity and disparity in these communities. We're hopefully moving away from COVID, or hopefully COVID's moving away from us, but who knows. But what we do know is that COVID, the pandemic, has exacerbated already existing issues in relation to inequality and disparity in rural and regional and remote areas of this state. The inequity existed before COVID, but the pandemic has made it worse, in simple words. So I'd like now to introduce you to our keynote speakers tonight. Dr. John England is a very experienced cardiologist. He's based in the Blue Mountains. He's practiced in Western New South Wales for over 40 years. Research has been part of his day-to-day work, including various NHMRC scholarships. John told me not to go on and on and on about his achievements, so I won't. But I do want to plug his books because it's something I love doing. He has written books on pacemakers. It's called Kickstart. It looks like this. And he's also written a book which is about insights in working in a hospital. It's called Dr. G, MD. And I happen to know that John is working on another book at the moment, which I won't say anything about because I don't want to spoil the surprise. John received the Centenary Medal for Medicine in the Blue Mountains community in 2003 and an OAM for cardiology in 2019. Our second keynote speaker tonight is Dr. Samantha Saunders, Sam. Sam is a junior medical officer in the Central Coast LHD whose placement in rural and regional New South Wales has really inspired her interest in cardiology and a desire to ultimately return to the country to work in these communities. In her final year of medical school, she lived in Lithgow and she completed placements at Lithgow, Bathurst and Mudgee. And her exposure to actually living in a rural community has highlighted for her the disparities that we know exist, that rural communities face, compared to people in urban areas, such as here in Sydney. We're also going to be hearing from Kate Allport. Now, we were hoping that Kate would be able to join us in person tonight, but she's unable to do so. Kate is a cardiac patient with complex health issues, and she'll be speaking on behalf of New South Wales regional patients, and we'll hear from Kate via a pre-recorded Zoom. But let's now welcome to the stage Dr. John England and Dr. Samantha Saunders. Thank you.
Well, tonight I just want to ask a few questions, and I hope that some of the recipients here tonight will tell us the answers, and of course, Samantha. The issues are that there is a big city-rural divide when it comes to cardiovascular outcomes and health. And this is just a picture of the red spots are where I seem to work in rural New South Wales, and this is for women, and this is the heart rate deaths that occur when you compare this middle area of New South Wales, the white areas beyond, which we'll talk about later. So I practice recently at Crow's Nest here in North Sydney, and the Heart Foundation has put together deaths. So in North Sydney, my practice, 33. Mudgee Golgong, where I've been this morning seeing patients before I came down here, 73. Burke and Brewarrina, where I used to practice intermittently, over 150. So this is a very busy slide, but this is what the Heart Foundation does. They have a map, and people, according to their postcode, can log in and find out what goes on in their particular postcode. So this is a postcode for the area of Mudgee Golgong, the mid-western, and it's very busy, but it just puts together the death rate, the hospital admissions, and also the risk factors of high blood pressure, cholesterol, hypertension, and activity, and obesity. And then, again, the same thing for North Sydney, and of course the figures are so much better and the risk factors are much better. So, this is the smoking history for men, and look at the red areas where people are really still smoking, and it's very hard to change behaviour out west. So, I've been looking at research more recently in looking at CT coronary angiograms. We can do this in Dubbo and Orange. It's very hard to send people for hospitals to have angiograms, but this new technology has changed the way we look at heart disease, and it's put away stress testing generally, and this is the way to look at someone's risk factors for future heart disease. So you have zero calcium, normal looking arteries, and then you have concrete arteries with calcium building up in the walls. And then associated with high calcium scores, we get plaque, and then eventually clotting, ruptured plaque, and heart attacks. So when I send patients to Dubbo, patients get their own reports back before I get them back. And the patients get pictures like this, with all their calcium in their arteries. And what I found was amazing when for 22 years I've been in Mudgee, and I started seeing people with calcium scores of 2,000 up to 4,500. Yet here in Crow's Nest, people get excited if their calcium score is 10. The difference is so amazing. And this is what's prompted me to go on and do some research. I've looked at, this is the papers that I've presented to the Cardiac Society over the years. This was the World Congress in Melbourne.
Used to jump from
And
2015
just looked
to
at
2010.
the water people were drinking
Double.
out west. A lot of people actually don't drink the town water because it tastes terrible. It comes out of the ground, particularly during drought times, and it's got full of sulphur and it's hard. You can't wash your hair, won't lather. I had a house in Mudgee. My hot water system clogged up, the element clogged up within 18 months. Where I had my shower was eroded within 2 years and had to be replaced. Everyone's plumbing is a problem when you're using town water. So what is happening to your coronary arteries? We looked at people's dental disease and the water you drink. If you're drinking town water as against tank water, you have incredible amount of dental disease. Actually, a cardiologist we looked at sending people to Sydney to try and fix their calcium concrete arteries, and things went wrong often. Calcified artery, and even surgeons can't bypass them. There's just nothing to bypass. So we looked at sending people directly to consider surgery rather than trying to do intervention with stents. We looked at the hard water. So more recently, we've tried to correlate this to climate change. Why are we using more and more bore water in towns like Dunedoo, Golgong, but also in parts of South Australia too, and in central Queensland? So I believe there is a climate change factor because we're not able to have soft water that's collected in reservoirs. Melbourne's hardness factor is less than 15. Sydney's water between 30 and 40. But out where I am, when it comes out into the town, initially it was around 280 hardness factor. Now the water is treated with hydrated lime and it's down to 150. But it's 10 times that of Melbourne, the hardness. So there's a factor. I've also gone further west to Brewarrina, and I did the Aboriginal Heart Clinic there for a while. I have 3 sons. My 3 sons have an Indigenous Aboriginal heritage through their mother, and we used to drive. But we were invited once from Brewarrina to the Opera House. It took 12 hours on a Saturday to get from Brewarrina by car to here. So if you think it takes 12 hours to get here by road, it takes 12 hours to go back. It's easier to get to Melbourne twice than to go to Brewarrina. But I come to this point now by saying, what's the future? The future is young doctors and researchers. And I've had students come from the Lithgow Medical School, including Samantha. And Samantha looked at all my research and said, this is crazy what you're doing. You're just looking at all the bad cases. You're just looking at it for collecting all the worst possible cases. What about looking at it properly? And she looked at my ethics approval and it really wasn't up to scratch. And it was And so she's redone all my ethics approval of what I've been doing for the last 5 or 10 years through the university. She looked at my statistics and said, well, you've got to go forward, not backwards. And don't collect all your bad cases. Let's look at 6 months. So she's looked at 6 months forward and for comparing Sydney and Mudgee. But I think I'll hand over to you, Samantha, and tell the story.
So good evening, esteemed colleagues and honoured guests. My name is Samantha Saunders and I'm a junior doctor at the Central Coast Local Health District. I completed my medical degree at the University of Notre Dame and I spent some time in Lithgow last year, and prior to that I did a Bachelor of Medical Science and honours in cardiovascular physiology and pharmacology at the University of New South Wales. I feel so very privileged to be here speaking to you tonight and to have the opportunity to speak to you about my research that I'm doing with Dr. England. So I've been interested in cardiology for some time now. My love for cardio started back in my undergraduate degree, hence why I chose to do a cardiovascular-based honours project. And that work was largely lab-based, and it was my first exposure to research, and it really inspired me to do research further. Since then, I've contributed to a total of 5 projects, most of which are in the process of being published, and including what we're doing at the moment. And hopefully I'll have the opportunity to do much more research over the course of my career. So, I had the great pleasure of meeting Dr. England last year in Lithgow. My time at Lithgow really enabled me to develop my understanding of the discrepancies that rural communities face when it comes to healthcare. It also offered me the opportunity to grow connections with the community and to learn their stories. I soon fell in love with the Lithgow community, who always had so much time for me. I had a really wonderful time at Lithgow, and this slide is really just to show you some of the fun that I had. During the year, I also had the opportunity to visit Bathurst and Mudgee, and that brings me on to my current research, which was inspired by Dr. England's patients. So as you are likely aware, and as we've already discussed earlier tonight, ischemic heart disease remains the leading cause of morbidity and mortality in Australia. 17,500 deaths are attributed to the disease annually, and there is an estimated point prevalence of 580,000 cases at any given time. Moreover, approximately $2.2 billion is spent on preventing and managing ischemic heart disease annually. What is even more concerning, however, is that Australia's rural and remote communities are affected at disproportionately higher rates compared to their metropolitan counterparts. Not only are those living further away from city centres more likely to experience cardiovascular risk factors and disease, but they are also much more likely to be hospitalised and die from their condition. So clearly there's a need to optimise preventative measures in this new group. So I've unintentionally plagiarised Dr. England's slide here, but as you can see, the incidence of ischemic heart disease is more so as you move west. So the darker red indicates higher rates, and the further west you go, the higher the incidence of cardiovascular disease. So Dr. England noticed that the coronary calcium scores in his patients in Mudgee appeared higher, as he said. Sometimes they are up in the thousands compared to in Sydney, where they are merely in the hundreds. And we thought, why is this the case? Well, given that one patient group is rural and the other is not, we did ask ourselves, could this be simply due to rurality? Well, yes, quite possibly, but we thought maybe there's more at play. For anyone who's visited Mudgee, you know the water may be very hard, tastes very bad, and just to drink water. It also doesn't lather, it's terrible. So to put the water hardness into perspective, Sydney water is considered soft water with a hardness level of less than 60 milligrams per litre of calcium carbonate. In contrast, the calcium levels in Mudgee water ranges between 150 milligrams per litre to greater than 600 milligrams per litre, depending on whether the source is town water or bore water, making it hard or very hard. So it's been shown that the average Australian consumes between 2.3 and 2.6 litres of water daily. If an individual were to consume water with the same properties as that of Sydney water, they would consume roughly 138 to 156 milligrams of calcium per day just from their drinking water. If an individual were to consume Mudgee water, on the other hand, one could expect a daily calcium intake of between 345 to 1,560 milligrams per day, which is 10 times that of that drinking Sydney water. To contextualise this, the recommended intake for an adult is 2,500 milligrams. So this brings me on to coronary artery calcium. So as John described, it is the deposition of calcium in the coronary arteries, and it is a highly specific marker of late to end-stage atherosclerosis. So CAC, or coronary artery calcium scoring, is a type of non-contrast CT scan. It is reported via both a numerical value, which is the Agatston score, as well as a percentile based on the patient's age and sex. And this really contextualises that number for the patient by comparing them to other peers in their age and sex group. It's used to determine the risk of one experiencing a cardiovascular event, such as a heart attack or stroke. And it also serves to inform pharmacological treatment decisions in asymptomatic individuals. So in patients with moderately high scores, they may be prescribed aspirin or a statin. So how does this tie in with the drinking water? Well, the link between dietary calcium intake and CAC scores has been studied by only a few groups. And the results in those groups are very conflicting. So research on drinking water specifically has not been studied much, and for these reasons we believe that we should explore this area further. So this finally brings me on to what we're doing at the moment. So we're doing a retrospective cohort study which utilises de-identified patient information. Patients have been categorised into 3 groups: those drinking Sydney water, those drinking Mudgee town water, and those drinking Mudgee tank water. And as I said before, the drinking water in all 3 groups have varying levels of calcium. We've collected the data that's seen here. This is baseline demographic data. We will then compare the calcium scores between groups, and we'll be looking at both the modified Agatston score as well as the percentile and comparing both of those. We are in the process of performing statistical analysis on the data now, and I'm looking forward to seeing what these results are. If calcium in drinking water is indeed associated with coronary artery calcium, it may redefine the risk factors for cardiovascular disease, particularly those living rurally. It could be a really important tool in preventing heart disease in the rural population. I look forward to answering any questions that you guys have, and I thank you so much again for having me. Very honoured to be here. Thank you.
We're going to now have a patient, Kate Allport, who's pre-recorded her story, and the difficulties it is for a patient in Mudgee to get the interaction between specialists and access to special care. And I'll let her tell her story. We also asked one of my patients, an ambulance officer, who's got a pacemaker, but unfortunately he couldn't come, but people from New South Wales Ambulance are here tonight to talk about the access of patients to Dubbo and to Orange when you're a paramedic. Thank you.
Good evening, Minister Hazzard, doctors, researchers, and all present. It's my honour to have been asked to speak on behalf of New South Wales regional patients. My name is Kate, and I'm a patient of Dr. John England's. And I live in central west New South Wales in the busy little town of Mudgee. Dr. England continues to consult in Mudgee, as he has thankfully done for many, many years. In 2021, I also came under the care of Associate Professor Michelle McGrady at RPA. As a result of late effects of radiotherapy, I have complex health issues. I was treated by wide field radiation in 1983 and 84. for Hodgkin's lymphoma at the age of 21. Almost 40 years of survivorship and dealing with collateral damage has provided much personal experience with this year's theme of resilience, recharge and recovery. In 2016, I became a cardiac patient. This took me totally by surprise, and as these things often do, it all happened very quickly. I don't doubt that quick action by a GP and the availability of a visiting cardiologist in my town at that time probably saved me from having a heart attack. If I'd had to wait for a referral and appointment with a Sydney cardiologist and then arrange travel, accommodation and all the things that go with a trip, I may not have had the outcomes that I've been very lucky to have. Without that type of local access, there are many who are not so fortunate though. Many specialists have met the needs of country people by either visiting or opening a practice in larger towns, but regional populations are growing, and so are major ailments associated with lifestyle and ageing, especially heart disease, diabetes, and mental health. Number one on the Heart Foundation's Heart Attack Hotspot Top 10 is a country area, with regional areas taking out 7 of the 10 places in this study. These figures show the need for improved cardiac care in the country. In closing, I'd like to implore doctors, scientists and funding bodies to keep striving in the quest for improvements to healthcare, and keep in mind the estimated 3.5 million or 39% of regional people in New South Wales. People who need cardiac care, such as farmers or meat workers who've contracted heart damage from brucellosis, the babies born with congenital heart issues, the cancer survivors, or the aged who may suffer cardiac arrest hours from medical care. We all rely on your research, funding and knowledge to help us live healthy, productive lives. For country patients, being able to access suitable care will continue to affect our health outcomes. It's certainly something that I'm very conscious of as I hopefully grow older and my care needs increase. For governments and the medical industry, satisfying the health demands of a growing regional population is the challenge you must meet. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you so much, John and Sam, and thank you especially to Kate too for making a really big effort to be with us here tonight, using the technology that we've all come to know and love. But it's really great to actually hear a personal story of someone who is, as she says, living with complex health issues and who's given us a snapshot of some of the really real issues people in rural and regional areas of New South Wales face. It's time now for us to have a chat, for a panel discussion, and I'd like to ask John and Sam to stay with us up here on the stage and also to introduce you to our 2 other panellists tonight. Dr. Kalinda Griffiths is a Yawuru woman from Broome. Owing to COVID, she's unable to attend in person tonight, and she's going to be zoomed in from Darwin. So hopefully we will see Kalinda on the screen very soon. Kalinda is an epidemiologist with the University of New South Wales who's worked in the research sector for over 20 years. Her real interest is in empirically addressing complex health disparities in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander populations. So Kalinda will be with us on the panel, and also joining us on the panel, and I invite her to come and join us on the stage.
She must have put a black sheet or something behind her, or they did.